All right, for example 2, it says for triangle LMN, what is measurement angle N? Then use law of sines to find measurement angle L, then find measurement angle M. So this time you notice we have side, side, side. And looking at the three sides, 17 is the biggest side, which means N is the biggest angle. So if I go with the side, side, side setup, and I'm going to use law of cosines to find one of the missing angles, the one I always want to find is the biggest. It doesn't matter. Law of cosines will find you the right answer, whether it's acute or obtuse. It's a very friendly formula as far as that's concerned. Law of sines is a little bit more ambiguous when it comes to what you're finding, acute and obtuse. But with law of cosines, if the answer is obtuse, it's obtuse. If it's acute, it's acute. It finds exactly what the answer is. There's no confusion whatsoever. All right. You can find any one of the three angles you want to, but if you go ahead and find the biggest angle immediately, then you don't have this possibility of using law of sines improperly later. So I usually, if I got a side, 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 no matter what they tell me to do, I'm going to find the biggest angle first, which is opposite 17. If I'm going to want to find this angle here for the law of cosines, again, that side is opposite this angle. When I set my law of cosines up, I need the 17 by itself, so 17 squared equals side squared that isn't 17 plus the other side squared minus 2 times 15 times 11.4 times cosine of n. Again, this side needs to be opposite that angle when you set up law of cosines. Just ensure that that happened. Again, any one of those three possibilities on that sheet all boil down to that one fact. The side all by itself on the left matches the angle all by itself on the right. All right. Now, unlike the other problem where just a big numerical expression over here, our variables living inside the cosine function. So this is where I'm going to have to be a little more careful in solving. All right. First thing is 17 squared is 289. 15 squared is 225. By all means, if you don't know those, use a calculator. But if you do, you can just go ahead and write them down. 11.4 squared is not as well known. So 11.4 squared is 129.96. And then all this stuff is being multiplied together. So the cosine of n obviously is the variable piece of that, but the rest of them are just numbers. So if I type in 2 times 15 times 11.4, I get 342. So it's going to be minus 342 cosine of n. So square everything, multiply everything, and get yourself to this point with the law of cosine when you're trying to find an angle. Okay. These problems, by the way, are the ones people tend to miss when you're trying to find a missing angle in the law of cosine. So just like to be a little more careful here. Now, you guys are a year removed from Algebra 1, and this is a little bit advanced than an Algebra 1 equation, but what I want to recognize is this. My variable here lives inside the cosine function, which is attached to the negative 342. All of that is together. That 342 has no effect on these two numbers here because these don't have cosines of n attached to them. So my next step in this process is I want to get this all by itself, so I want to move these two guys over here. So I'm going to chop the 225, so minus 225. I'm going to chop the 129.96, put minus 129.96. And that's going to come out to some number. I don't care what that number is. It's just going to be some number. So if I type in my calculator, 289 minus 225 minus 129.96 equals negative 65.96. That's going to equal negative 342 cosine of n. Right? Now, to get out what cosine of n is, again, I want cosine of n all by itself, just like the last problem I had sine of b equals number. I want cosine of n equals number. So I'm going to divide both sides by negative 342. So these numbers you get moved over by subtracting. This one you have to divide to get rid of. So now I'm going to type in negative 65.96 divided by negative 342. Two negatives make a positive, and we get positive 0.1929. 0.1929 equals cosine of n. So to find n, just like before it said sine equals number, I would hit inverse sine. Now it says cosine equals number, so I'm going to do inverse cosine. So second cosine of 0.1929 gets me that n is equal to 78.8779. It doesn't specify any rounding on this. Let's say nearest tenth on this also as well. The last one's nearest tenth. So if n, let me erase this arrow here. If angle n is 78.9 degrees, and now I want to find angle L or M, notice we've already found the biggest angle. So the other two angles are both acute, so you could theoretically use law of sines to find either one or both. Doesn't matter. I usually use law of sines to find one. So it says find L. L is the smallest angle. So 11.4 over sine of L equals 17 over sine of 78.9. That, of course, would equal 15 over sine of M, but I'm going to subtract from 180 to find M. Once you find one angle, use law of sines to find another angle, then subtract from 180 to find the third angle. That's usually the most efficient way. But again, I might actually use this instead of that. So if I come over here and type in sine of 78.8779, that's this part here, 0.9812. So I cross multiply, I'm going to get 17 times sine of L equals that product there, so 11.4 times 0.9812. So that's 11.1857. By both sides by 17. Sine of L is equal to 11.1857 divided by 17 is 0.6580. So to find L, I'm going to inverse sine of that number. So inverse sine of 0.6580, and that comes out to 41.1 degrees. And now once we know those two angles, to find M, measure of angle M is going to equal 180 minus 78.9 minus 41.1. So measure of angle M is 180 minus 120. So the measure of angle M is 60 degrees. 60 degrees, 41.1 degrees, and measure of angle N is 78.9 degrees. Right, so I don't have a step-by-step process in law of cosines, but if you see side angle side or side side side, step one, use law of cosines to find the thing you can find. For side side side, find the biggest angle first always. That's just advisable, all right? Not required, but advisable. Then, once you've found that information, go to the law of sines to find a small angle, one of the two smaller angles, and then do whatever else you need to do to find the missing pieces. All right? So, that is law of cosines in a nutshell. Hopefully that made enough sense for you guys to give it some practice here. Once you get used to the steps, it's not that big a deal. Again, on this, just be cautious with the algebra here. These must be with subtraction, then you have to do a division. I've seen a lot of people try and get this involved with these, and it's not legal to do that. So make sure that you're careful in that step.